So I wanted to spend some more time on Project 2 in EDU614. We've received a number of discussion forum posts, emails, and other communications where there's still a lot of confusion about Project 2. So I'm going to go over a couple concepts in the second part of this video. But before I get to that piece, I first want to say Project 2 is a very complex project. It is not something you can wait till the very last minute on because it is going to take a lot of thought and time to complete. So if you have not started it yet, you need to get working on it really soon so you don't run out of time to make revisions. On top of that, the other piece is that we've had questions of, do you have to use all the same tools as you did in Project 1? Do you have to use one tool? Questions about carrying over from Project 1 to Project 2. It really depends on how your Project 1 was set up. Some were set up in a way that really lend themselves to moving over to Project 2. Others have found that they really need to kind of take the concepts you learned in Project 1 and almost start from scratch, maybe using the same state standards and ISTE standards, but then go different directions from there because of the requirements in Project 2, which is what we're going to spend time focusing in on. I'm not going to read through all the directions for Project 2, but I am going to talk about four main things that have to be part of Project 2. Project 2, you are essentially putting together an entire lesson for an online course. And so in that lesson, you have to build in different types of support. You have to have differentiation, you have to have scaffolding, and you have to have Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And all four of those things are different. In basic terms, scaffolding is just starting small with little bits and pieces of complex things and building up to the big complex piece. So in writing, it may be that you do the introduction first and get through that. And then from there, you go on to the body. And then from the body, you go to the closing. And eventually, you work your way through a whole paper. That's scaffolding. Differentiation means that even breaking it apart that much does not always help every student. So I might need to take it a step further. So what I might do is I might start by having students that do not get by with just breaking it down into small pieces. I may even have them actually create an outline first and work with them on that outline. And then from that, start writing individual sentences. Now we're getting through the differentiation piece and we're getting into or close to some of the Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And so I want to look at the response to intervention website. And inside this, there are two really brief examples or explanations of Tier 3 and Tier 2 interventions. Okay? And so Tier 2, student not making adequate progress in the core curriculum are provided with increasingly intensive instruction matched to their needs on the basis of level of performance and rates of progress. At this level for Tier 3, students receive individualized intensive interventions that target the student's skill deficits for the remediation of existing problems and the prevention of more severe problems. So instead of the English language arts example I gave a second ago for differentiation and scaffolding, let's talk about math. Okay, so with Tier 2 and Tier 3, let's say that I had a pre-assessment. And on this pre-assessment, I had 4 different shapes. And I had measurements for the sides of those shapes. And I needed the students to find the area of each shape. Okay, and so I give that to them as a pre-assessment. On the pre-assessment, when I get the scores back, I see that a student A came up with the wrong answer, and when I start digging deeper, I see that they used the right process. Say they multiplied when they were supposed to. However, they didn't multiply the numbers correctly. So at that point in time, it's more than just understanding how to find the area. They understand how to find the area of that shape because they use that multiplication process. But they didn't multiply correctly. So their gap is the multiplication. So my tier 2 and tier 3 support goes to getting them some additional support on just the multiplication. Forget the larger lesson of the area of shapes. We need to get the multiplication down first. Then we can get through that area, and then we can move to more complex shapes. So that's tier 2 and tier 3 intervention. So I've talked about those things briefly. Let's look at an example, because I also in this video want to talk to you about how Canvas can help you do these things, because that's the other part of this project, is that you have to create student-facing content in Canvas. So I am in the Math 3 course that I helped develop last year for North Carolina Virtual Public School, and I'm going to go into modules for a minute. And I'll start off real quick by saying there are 4 main types of ways to display content inside of Canvas. You've got a page, which is basically a set of directions, your standards, different information like that. You have assignments, you have quizzes, and you have discussion forums. And there's different things you can do with those pieces to build in this differentiation, this scaffolding, and the tier 2 and tier 3 support. So without going into deep detail, there are a couple things in the course that I wanted to show you. And if I look at the breakdown of a module, I have the module introduction and objectives. So this would be an example of some of the student-facing content that you would have to create. You would do an introduction to your lesson. You would include your objectives, your state standards objectives, and your ISTE standards. And you would just put that together on a document, and that's your introduction. It would be really good if you found a cool picture to go along with it and you added that. That's not mandatory. But if we go back, I've got 2 things. I've got a pre-assessment and I've got formative assessment. Pre-assessment determines what path the students are going to go on. Notice there are pathway 1, 2, and 3. So when the student takes the pre-assessment, depending on their score, the instructor can go down to one of 3 pathways. The standard pathway is pathway 2. Notice pathway 1 and 3 are hidden. Everyone starts out on pathway 2, and it is just a regular assignment that goes on the topic that's being presented in the course. But knowing ahead of time what I just said a minute ago, of knowing where students might go wrong or miss things and miscomprehend, we've already built an additional pathway that goes back and catches some of those beginning skills. So in Canvas, you can do this one of 2 ways. First, Canvas has something called Mastery Paths. And Mastery Paths is a tool you can set that says, okay, they took the pre-assessment and they got 8 out of 10, so they go to this location next. They took the pre-assessment and they got 6 to 7 out of 10. They go to this location. And it's based on the whole assignment. And that's automatically handled based on the controls that you set as a teacher in Canvas. The other thing you can do for differentiation, which is the way that it's handled in this course, is that Mastery Paths is not turned on based on an actual score of the pre-assessment. Instead, the teacher goes in and manually, once the teacher sees who scores what and what they've missed, the teacher then goes in and looks at the 3 pathways and determines which one would be best for the student. And if I go to edit and I go down to the bottom, I have the ability to assign it to everyone or take it off and only assign it to certain people. So if I go back to the math example I started with and I say I'm looking for the area of a rectangle, a triangle, a square, and one other item, whatever that shape may be. I have four. And I have four different remediation activities set up. So say they get all of them except for they don't know how to figure out a triangle. Well, I can have an assignment already set up that's additional, that's hidden in the beginning, just like this pathway one is hidden. And I can go take this off for everyone and assign it to specific students and give them that intervention, that differentiation that they need to keep going. And so that is a massive part of what you're going to do in Project 2. Do you have to create the entire quiz? No. Just if I'm doing math, just a couple problems, but explaining the concept. You have to have those words and those explanations in your Project 2 in order to pass the competency. You have to have differentiation in there and explain it. You have to have scaffolding in there and explain it. And you have to have Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions and explain how those work in your project. So I hope this helps to clear up some of the confusion. If you have more specific questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll help to explain those.